Welcome to Mystic Realms Recap. Links are in the description below. Please show some love of the author and me. On to the show. The animosity between the two had been going on for a long while. It had reached the point where their eyes blazed with hatred when they came face to face. Now that they had a chance to battle openly, naturally neither dared to fall behind. They only used a short moment before initiating this battle together. They went all out, blasting each other with high-level spells, which instantly roused a raging elemental storm in the Aurora Square. There were hasty recitation of spells and surging magical waves. In the blink of an eye, large amounts of mana effused from both parties, who kept blasting each other with almost 10 level 15 spells. Even a person like Macklin could only watch on with shock. This method of fighting was like throwing their lives away. In a brief moment, both had used up 3 elemental shields. Almost each of them had barely scraped through the opponent's attacks. Almost every single shield made it through the elemental shield's cooldown time just right before the instant the next attack hit. In an instant, the thousands of mages sitting at the spectator seats were in daze simultaneously. Everyone was a senior mage. How could they not tell how heated this battle was? From their perspective, it seemed like these two fellas had taken aphrodisiacs and were going against each other with their lives. They did not have any feelings or leave any chances. They put their lives on the line for every single chance they seized. Nobody cared about defense, it was always going straight at each other. This way of fighting with their lives made everyone feel that they were not spectating a match between trial apprentices. Instead, they were sitting in a blood-stained coliseum and spectating a primitive and brutal slaughter. Thankfully, these two trial apprentices were lucky. Even though the timings of the 3 elemental shields were cutting it really close, not a single death had been caused yet. Fuck, is this guy really Matthias? At this time, Lin Li started to be shocked. The power that Matthias displayed was simply too powerful. It was like another person when compared to the past. Back then, he could use 4 arcane missiles to break all 4 of this guy's limbs. Now, he had to time his elemental shield usage to scrape through the bombardment of spells from the opponent. Relax, I told you I won't kill you, Matthias' lips curled into a smile. It was as if this battle had long been in his grasp. Kill your mother's *s, Lin Li was waiting for this chance. He muttered that sentence, and then raised the ether staff. After hastily reciting, a large fireball was shot out with a roar. This pyroblast was long prepared by Lin Li. He was waiting for Matthias' elemental shield to be almost broken and to give him a huge surprise. This was the perfect chance. At this point, both of them had just started countering each other. Under the circumstance that the mana retroaction had no effect, Lin Li used a chilling touch to counter Matthias' flaming storm. This clash could be said to be even. Both sides did not gain any advantages, but it was at this time that Lin Li's unparalleled mental strength had an unimaginable use. The mental strength superiority gave Lin Li half a second head start. The chilling touch's recitation. Afterwards, he shortened the execution timing of the pyroblast insanely. The execution of this pyroblast was almost at its pinnacle. It almost made the onlooking mages think this was another instantaneous pyroblast. Matthias' next spell was only recited halfway through when he suddenly heard a whiz coming from a distance. After that, he felt that a brilliant red flare flashed by his eyes. This pyroblast struck a critical hit. It was when Matthias' defense was at its weakest. The old elemental shield was close to breaking, and the new elemental shield had not made it through the cooldown timing yet. At this time, the only thing Matthias could do was to desperately raise a negligible ice armor and watch as that gigantic fireball blasted his body. A muffled boom could be heard in everyone's mind. The unparalleled fire attribute element had almost instantaneously swallowed Matthias. In an instant, torrential flares rose up and covered everything in flames. It was like a plague that gave everyone goosebumps. After using a pyroblast, Lin Li did not continue attacking. Instead, he stood at his original position and caught his breath. This pyroblast was definitely a planned attack. He had already calculated the timing for Matthias' elemental shield from the start, and had been using all sorts of methods to distract his opponent all the while. The advantage of timing started stacking up bit by bit, and when it came to the instantaneous pyroblast, it naturally gave people a weird sensation. Why was this pyroblast so fast? In fact, it was not that the pyroblast was fast. It was the result of superiority exploding in an instant. Even Matthias could not defend against the instantaneous explosion of the pyroblast. After all, the elemental shield on his body was already on the brink of collapsing. Now, a pyroblast had blasted right on his body. It was like breaking the last straw on his body, and it immediately caused the elemental shield to completely collapse. Once the surging fire attribute magical element exploded, even a warrior protected by high-level combat energy would definitely not be able to defend against it, what more a robe-wearing and magic staff-wielding Matthias. It's still not clear who is killing whom, Lin Li scornfully pouted his lips. The release of this pyroblast had also meant that he had complete control over this battle's rhythm. Even if Matthias was lucky to not die, he had to have suffered serious injuries. As long as Lin Li continued suppressing him with spells, victory was only a matter of time. F***ck. Macklin, who was at the VIP stand, blurted out vulgarities. His own trial apprentice had smashed the opponent in an instant, but Macklin could not even be cheerful. His old face had been frowning due to anxiousness, and he started to mumble complaints. "Little bastard, oh, little bastard, why don't you listen to my advice? I told you to avoid trouble whenever possible. You still have a lot of time and a bright future, why do you have to do things so ruthlessly?" Indeed, Matthias was really hated. But being hated was one thing. After all, he was the successor of the Marathon family. You crippled Gryffindor and killed a member of the Marathon family. F***ck, do you still want to stay in the Felon Kingdom? One had a chance to be a legendary mage of the Arbiters, and to top things off, the other was a thriving man with thousands beneath. Even if it was me, I would still have to think about the consequences. You're really great, you little bastard. First, you crippled Gryffindor with a mental disruption, and now, you almost killed Matthias with a pyroblast. F***ck, you really think that becoming an archmage would make you invincible? F***ck, this little bastard is really reckless, Macklin grumbled to himself for a while, and he could only use that sentence to conclude everything. No, Matthias is fine, Aldwin, who was sitting beside, was shaking his head with assurance. Ah? Macklin was stunned immediately. He's still fine? Didn't you notice? Matthias' magical wave had not shown any changes up till now. Oh, yeah, after all, Macklin was a level 18 archmage. Initially, he was too worried about his disciple getting into trouble, and that was why he did not notice Matthias' abnormal magical wave. After hearing what Aldwin said, Macklin immediately understood. Indeed, Matthias' magical wave was still normal. From the beginning, it did not have any changes, as though what struck him was not a level 15 spell, but just a mere pebble. Seems like Matthias has grown quite a lot in these 2 months. After Aldwin said that, he immediately shut up and focused his attention on the battle that had yet to conclude. Macklin scratched his head. Did this kid take the wrong medicine today? It was only natural that Macklin was so doubtful. The raise in Matthias' strength was really too abnormal. Within less than 2 months, he turned into a professional from a newbie, from level 11 or 12 to level 15 and above. No words could be used to describe such a tremendous improvement. It was especially so for this match. He had been hit by a pyroblast, but he came out unscathed. It went against everyone's magical knowledge. Fuck, at this time, Lin Li was also shocked. It was because he clearly saw that Matthias slowly walked out of the flames with the magic staff in his hands. This can't be real, right? Watching as Matthias walked out from the flames, Lin Li immediately felt goosebumps all over. How did this guy become so powerful, even a pyroblast would not kill him? Isn't this match gonna be in deep trouble? Mage Felix, you've really disappointed me. Matthias' face still bore a cruel smile. At this time, Matthias did not look like someone that had just been struck by a pyroblast. His whole body did not even have a single burn mark. His hair was still neat, and his handsome face was still as fair as ever. Even that robe made with fine craftsmanship did not have a single crease. No matter who was it that saw Matthias now, they all suspected that everything that they saw was just a hallucination. The pyroblast did not exist at all, and it did not even pose a single threat to Matthias. It's too unreal, too unreal. Lin Li refused to drop the matter, his hand holding on to the ether staff tightly. He was never someone to give up easily. It does not matter if it's one pyroblast, 2, 3, 4, or even 10, at least one of them will kill him. Anyway, I have mana and potions. If I can't defeat you, Matthias, I will write my name in reverse. At almost the same time when Matthias was walking out from the flames, Lin Li had started to hastily recite spells. He was still using the pyroblast, and the recitation was quick and fast. It was as if saliva was about to pour out of Lin Li's mouth. The revolving flames and the abstruse runes started to weave a myriad of dreamy colors in the Aurora Square. Yet at this time, Matthias did not move at all. Idiot, don't you get it? The power of the flames will never hurt an envoy of the abyss. Matthias' voice was gruesome and cruel. In that instant, Lin Li even thought that a magical beast was roaring at him. It was especially so for that word abyss, for it gave Lin Li a shiver down his spine he'd never felt before. After that, he realized the pyroblast that he had released had disappeared. There was no reason or signs. It was as if a void crack had appeared in the Aurora Square. It had swallowed a level 15 spell in front of the spectators' eyes. Lin Li was really stupefied. He rubbed his eyes furiously to try and see things better. This was a complete joke. A level 15 spell had suddenly disappeared without any reason. Could it be that Matthias had a brand on his body that could instantly generate a mana channel and shift the opponent's mana into it? Osric wasn't this generous, right? What the hell? It was as if someone had stepped on Hoffman's tail in the VIP area. After a scream, he jumped up. He could not believe what he had seen. What sort of drugs did this little rabbit of the Marathon family take? How did he become so powerful? Forget about that initial pyroblast, after all, there had been a thin layer of elemental shield protecting him. But this time, Hoffman clearly saw that Matthias' body did not have elemental shield or any protection from any spells. He was completely naked standing there, no different from a prostitute that was naked and spreading her legs wide open. Fuck, how could this be? Without protection from any spells, even the sword sage that was protected by a high-level combat energy would be seriously injured when blasted directly by a level 15 spell. Could it be that Matthias has trained to be stronger than the sword sage? Then why did he even join this finals? Just let the judges announce his victory. Hoffman, please be quieter. Herza frowned. This damned fatty that was making a big fuss was giving him a headache. He was constantly making movements, not allowing the others to watch the match peacefully. How can I calm down? Hoffman rubbed his brow. He was so anxious that cold sweat had appeared. It's not like you did not see it. This little rabbit from the Marathon family is like a monster. A fucking pyroblast could not even kill him. What else is there that he can't do? What's so weird about that? Herza shook his head with a smile. Did you forget about that murder case in the Breezy Plains 50 years ago? 50 years ago in the Breezy Plains? Hoffman was in a daze. Almost immediately afterward, his expression was panic-stricken. You're talking about Ashen Warlord Roland? That's right. Fuck. Hoffman looked at Matthias, who was in the Aurora Square, for a while with a face full of anxiety and doubt before he suddenly spewed vulgarities. Fuck, I really did not think that this little bastard was actually Roland's disciple. No wonder I kept thinking that he looked repulsive. So that's how it is. Fucking Roland is really an idiot. Of all the people to take in as a disciple, he chose this little bastard. Hoffman was cursing passionately, but his heart could not help but be anxious. The fame of Ashen Warlord Roland was known by even a 3-year-old in the Breezy Plains. There was no choice, this guy was really too famous. He was one of the biggest slaughterers in the Felon Kingdom after Osric from the Dark Ages. This legendary murderer that was always wearing a black robe and covering his face with a hood commanded mysterious powers from the abyss. He had once used his mysterious powers to summon a powerful demon 50 years ago, and killed thousands of soldiers from the Felon Kingdom in a single night. The two of them stood there quietly, and nobody said anything, even if it was Matthias. He was very clear that the hatred between them had reached the point where it could no longer be solved. At this time, any words would only be meaningless, and any insults would be useless. Only a battle to the death and taking down one party would put an end to this hatred. Match, start. The two unlucky judges hid at the side instinctively once they gave the signal. They had to hide. The two trial apprentices in this match were each a real piece of work. There was no need to mention Matthias. The magical wave that he was emitting was like a vortex that was swallowing everything. Some of the people that knew something about the murder case back then had already guessed that Matthias had to be a disciple of the Ashen Warlock. As for that fella called Felix, he was more impudent than Matthias. A monster that could fire out 60 pyroblasts. Who would even be so free to stand next to him? If his mood were to be bad, what could they do if he were to use pyroblast? Could it be that I, as a judge, would still have to be blasted by a trial apprentice until I become an idiot? No way, definitely no way. Gryffindor is already pitiful enough. We two judges would not want to join in as well. Anyway, this is last the match. Let's stay further away from these two dangerous fellas. Once they are done, whoever can still stand in the Aurora Square would be the winner. That was what these two despicable judges were thinking. Almost at the same, these two judges hid at the side. The battle between the two trial apprentices had also started. They only used a split second, and it made the audience feel a fiery aura. There was no probing or prelude. There was intense clash of magic the moment both of them arrived. Thundershock going against Cloudstorm immediately caused thousands of golden sparks to appear in the Aurora Square. The endless magical elements were like an enraged beast, letting loose a deafening roar. There were countless lightning bolts descending from the sky amidst the crackling sound of electricity. It created a gigantic net within a 50-meter radius. At the same time, the electrical energy had seemingly torn apart the sky like a golden wyrm in an instant, causing the entire Aurora Square to be covered in a golden luster. The massacre 50 years ago had shocked the entire Felon Kingdom. That afternoon, the most elite Sky Knights of the Felon Kingdom had departed for the breezy plains. The mission they received was to kill the Ashen Warlock and the demon he had summoned at all costs. At the same time, tens of branches of the Adventurers Guild had added the name of the Ashen Warlock into the mission archives. It was the first ever 5 million gold coin reward. When it was announced, it had attracted countless adventurers. But 50 years later, the Ashen Warlock was still alive, and he still stayed in a small town just north of the breezy plains. He was still leading a peaceful and law-abiding life in the fields. Nothing had changed. It was as if the royal court's rage and the reward from the Adventurers Guild had never happened at all. In that town where the Ashen Warlock lived, nobody seemed to know that their neighbor was a ruthless killer that had killed thousands with just a wave of his hand. They only knew this wealthy but unsociable old man did not like to come in contact with others. He did not like to speak with people. He either conducted weird experiments in his room every day or was sitting in the fields in a daze. Only people like Hoffman would know that after that murder case, the prestige of the Felon Royal Court had received an impact that almost destroyed it. The Sky Knights set off on that very day's afternoon, towards the breezy plains. In just 5 days, they returned to Alana in a hurry. When they returned, they only brought back 500 griffins, and only about 100 men were alive. The once high and mighty Sky Knights had received a large blow to their morale while trying to capture the Ashen Warlock. It was only after tens of years, when Azalez was in control of the Sky Knights, that they started to regain their former glory. As for the Adventurers Guild's mission archive, it was eerily neat. But whichever adventurer that tried to take on this task, without any exceptions, their name had the following added: dead, mission failed. That murder case, 50 years ago, was truly a shock for the Breezy Plains. The fame of the Ashen Warlock had resounded across the whole Breezy Plains. Almost all of the heads of all forces had placed the Ashen Warlock on the list of dangerous personage as soon as the murder case happened. Even the town he lived in had become like a restricted zone. It was because the Ashen Warlock once said that anybody entering the small town without an invitation would be considered a challenger. The current Breezy Plains could be said to be the most chaotic place in the Felon Kingdom. Countless powerful factions were gathered, and it was also a strategic location. Additionally, with the Dwarf Kingdom keeping it under surveillance, it was a fool's talk for a one-man to establish himself there as a single power. Yet, after 50 years, not a single faction dared to challenge the Ashen Warlock. It was because nobody knew how severe the consequences would be if they were to anger this solitary old man. As for how strong the Ashen Warlock was, there was no definite answer till now, but there was one point that needed not be questioned. The president of the Atlanta Guild of Magic, the legendary mage Aldwin that had reached level 21, had once said that if he were to duel with the Ashen Warlock, he would not even have 30% chance of winning. The business of the Glitter Gold Trade Union spread throughout whole Amril. The wealth that they had was an astronomical number. As long as they were willing, they could even use the wealth they had to overthrow a small kingdom, but Hoffman was very clear that even if the Glitter Gold Trade Union had 10 times the money they had now, they would absolutely not dare to provoke that terrifying demon. In fact, even the Felon Royal Court had to admit that choosing to surround the Ashen Warlock back then was the worst mistake. This decision had caused the Felon Royal Court to lose the Sky Knights as well as all of the influence that the Royal Court should rightfully have. Also, tens of years afterward, Felon's Weaking had given the Leaden Kingdom a chance to take advantage of it to rise in power. This time, even Hoffman started to be concerned. The disciple of the Ashen Warlock was not a laughing matter. Of all the powerhouses in the Felon Kingdom, the Ashen Warlock was definitely the scariest one. There was nobody like him. Mysterious yet powerful. Nobody dared to butter up this character. If Macklin were to describe it, the old man would probably pout his lips and mumble, "Ashen Warlock? You're referring to that old Fellock at the Breezy Plains." Indeed, the personality of these two was too similar. It was like they were made from the same mold. The reason for that murder case back then was only because a few soldiers stationed at the borders of Felon accidentally stepped and killed the Ashen Warlock's dog while marching. This incident was like stirring up a hornet's nest. The Ashen Warlock went straight to Palatine and found the border military commander that was stationed there. He wanted to seek justice for his dog, no matter what. The commander for the border troops back then was the uncle of the current king. Why would His Highness, that was used to throwing his weight around, care about who was this Ashen Warlock? Met with his attitude, the Ashen Warlock used a hellfire immediately and flattened half of the military base, without uttering another word. This issue escalated, and tens of thousands of troops rushed into the small town, capturing everyone in the town while trying to force them to hand over the damned murderer. In the end, the Ashen Warlock opened the gates of the abyss and summoned a high-level demon. He had taken away thousands of lives in a single night. From Hoffman's perspective, it was always better not to provoke people that had such a distorted mind. Just when Hoffman's face was turning pale, the situation of the battle in the Aurora Square took a turn. Although Lin Li was slightly shocked after his pyroblast was swallowed by thin air, his spellcasting rhythm was not disturbed at all. At the point when Matthias was walking out of the flames, Lin Li had already raised an elemental shield. Afterward, he used a mental protection field. He transitioned to defense without a single bit of hesitation. He was so decisive that it left the audience speechless. It was very easy to transition to defense, but it required courage to transition to defense while having the advantage. Everyone knew that Matthias was weird, but who would be willing to give up the advantage that they had? However, Lin Li's thinking was different. Matthias was unscathed after being hit directly by a pyroblast. At this time, Lin Li had already known that he did not have a single advantage. Even if he could make use of the time that Matthias was unprepared and blasted another pyroblast, what would it do? It would still not deal any damage to him. Before finding the crux of the problem, it would be pointless even if he were to cast any more pyroblasts. This advantage that might seem substantial had actually amounted to nothing already. Furthermore, Lin Li had always felt that Matthias was abnormal. His laughter was too weird, and he was booming with confidence. He might even come up with some powerful method to deal with Lin Li if another pyroblast were to do 0 damage to him. It was the final match, so it was better to be safe than sorry. Boom, as expected, a loud sound had erupted from the side just when Lin Li had laid down the mental protection field. A large fireball descended from the sky. It looked like a gigantic meteor. In an instant, everybody felt the earth shake. The loud sound was like thunder, and countless flares flew around too. It had instantly swallowed Lin Li's silhouette completely. If it wasn't because of the elemental shield that he had raised, Lin Li might have already been turned into a pile of ashes. F***ck, hellfire. Instantly, there were gasps of shock coming from the audience. Indeed, it was an infernal golem from the abyss, hellfire. When the meteor landed on the Aurora Square, and after raising a plane of dazzling flares, the magical elements did not dissipate. Instead, they got even more chaotic. At the same time when the crowd was gasping in shock, that gigantic fireball underwent a weird distortion. After that, there was an intense tremble, and the fireball transformed into an infernal golem that was almost 10 meters tall. What the hell, even if with Lin Li's strength, he could not help but have goosebumps when he suddenly saw this infernal golem that came from the abyss. This was a monster that had the power of at least level 15. Its body was in between that of a demon and an elemental. It did not feel pain, nor did it have any thoughts. It only had the most primitive bloodlust and the basic ability to understand its summoner's commands. When the meteor transformed into an infernal golem, Lin Li made a run for it without even thinking. This was not a joke. With the body of a mage, it was purely seeking death to go against such a powerful monster that was almost 10 meters tall. Boom. After that, there was another large sound. The fist of the infernal golem heavily struck the Aurora Square. In an instant, there were countless flares fluttering around. This heavy punch immediately created a large crater in the square. So powerful, luckily, Lin Li's reaction was on time. He had just moved a few steps, and the fist of the hellfire landed. The spot with the large crater was the exact spot where he'd just stood. If he'd been late by 1 or 2 seconds, the thing that was punched would not have been only the stone slabs covering the Aurora Square. Count yourself lucky, Matthias was gritting his teeth. At this time, he had to admit that this Gerosis mage was indeed cunning. But, could the attacks of the hellfire be dodged, just because he wanted to? Matthias exhausted a lot of mana to absorb a pyroblast just so that he could increase the power of the hellfire. Don't think that even this hellfire was not even 10 meters, so how strong it could be? Based on strength, it was definitely the strongest hellfire that he had ever summoned. The hellfire that transformed from the meteor stood there. It was like a burning mountain. The incomparable heat from the flames was gushing over. It made Lin Li really dizzy. The movements of the hellfire were not nimble, but every step it took always covered a distance of several meters. Even if Lin Li had the hastening spell, it would not able to handle such physical torture. It was just in the blink of an eye that he had already been forced to the wall by the hellfire. Luckily, Lin Li's reaction was fast enough. Just casting hastening spell, he already felt a surge of heat coming from his back. Lin Li did not panic, though. He just raised his ether staff and cast a delaying spell on the hellfire. While making use of this chance, Lin Li managed to cast a levitation spell when it was almost too late, flying past the hellfire's head. While already being in the air, Lin Li did not stop. There was a hasty recitation coming the sky, and then there was a bone-chilling magical wave, tearing apart the scorching air in an instant. Ice, 1,000 miles of ice. The thousands of mages seated at the spectators' area had seemingly been affected by the group fixation spell. They all were in a daze simultaneously, and all of their gazes were fixed on the area above the Aurora Square, staring at the young mage that was levitating. I'm not mistaken, right? Some of them that had a weaker spirit even pinched themselves hard to make sure that they were not dreaming. With the pain coming from their thighs, they knew everything was real. F***ck. This really is living hell. Macklin sprang up from his seat and his old face's expression showed that he found it unbelievable. He did not imagine that Felix was only level 15 in the previous round and had suddenly actually broken through during this round, using 1,000 miles of ice straight away. Macklin was right. When he cast the levitation spell, Lin Li seemed to have caught on to something. All of a sudden, he felt that his mind was suddenly enlightened. Suddenly there were answers to whatever he could not understand previously. The breakthrough this time came really weirdly, and it was even more without reason. It was different from previous times. This sort of feeling was equivalent to being struck by a gigantic pie from the sky while walking on a road casually. The most confusing part for Lin Li was that this pie not only hit his brain, but it also taught him how to make pies. Even though the breakthrough this time round was sudden, it was not enough to cause Lin Li to panic. After all, during this period of time, he had been fighting all sorts of magical beasts in the Cinder Woods. After that, he had been submerged in studies at the Omniscient Tower for almost half a month. Additionally, there were a few consecutive high-level battles today. Strictly speaking, this breakthrough could be considered smooth sailing. But at the same time, Lin Li shockingly discovered that his brain seemed to have gained something. Indeed, there was something else. For example, when he cast that 1,000 miles of ice just now, Lin Li clearly remembered that he had never come in contact with the recitation for 1,000 miles of ice before today. After all, it was a genuine level 16 spell. No matter how much of a genius or how hardworking Lin Li was, it would be difficult to rely purely on the elemental sequencing to model out the casting process of the 1,000 miles of ice before he had even reached level 16. Without mastering the process casting, it would naturally mean not mastering the spell. Even if he had memorized it thoroughly, it would have been useless. But, at that moment, the recitation for the 1,000 miles of ice had suddenly appeared in his mind. Lin Li did not have to ponder or consider, he merely followed his instincts and recited the spell, casting this genuine level 16 spell. At this time, Lin Li even suspected that he actually had amnesia. If not, why did he know the incantations for the 1,000 miles of ice, yet forgot where he had learned it? But such worries quickly disappeared. Because in the next moment, Lin Li again discovered that even weirder things were appearing in his mind. Oh no, it's not weird. These things that suddenly appeared in his mind might seem to be messy, but after carefully tidying them up, everything seemed understandable. Lin Li then forcibly split them into 3 categories. This first category would be incantations similar to the 1,000 miles of ice. Lin Li had heard or seen at least 90% of them, but this was not important. At least Lin Li could use the structure of the language to forcibly decipher that there were indeed some incantations of the spell. The second category would be weirder. If Lin Li was correct, those were mostly magic laws, and they were the most core laws at that. However, something was off. These magic laws had mostly undergone changes. Although the changes were not much, Lin Li could still feel it. This discovery gave Lin Li a sudden bone-chilling feeling. Indeed, powerful mages were able to change the magic laws, but the more core the laws were, the harder it was to change them. The several laws that had appeared in his mind, even a powerhouse at Aldwin's level would face difficulty trying to change any of them. As for the third category, Lin Li decided to temporarily set it aside. It was because he could not make head nor tail of it after researching for a while. He could only make a rough guess that these were part of abandoned magical knowledge, but as to what sort of magical knowledge, Lin Li had no clue at all. So, he cleverly made the choice to give up for now. One had to admit that Lin Li's adaptability was really good. Under such weird and random circumstances, he could still remain calm. His spell-casting speed was not affected, either. He had already released 1,000 miles of ice in an instant. Currently, Lin Li was floating in the air. With this 1,000 miles of ice, the infernal golem that was wreaking havoc had been frozen instantly. This time even Matthias was stunned. What the hell? Matthias spat out angrily, but he quickly regained his composure. He held onto the magic staff tightly and started reciting quickly as well. He also used the levitation spell, and was level with Lin Li in midair in the blink of an eye. The distance between the two was 20 meters. Pity, it's a little late. Matthias stared at Lin Li, and his gaze had a tinge of disdain and pity. From Matthias' perspective, the opponent's breakthrough this time round was too late. The breakthrough from level 15 to level 16 would be different from the other times. The appearance of the 4 signature spells also meant that the opponent would require a large amount of time to study and learn them before truly grasping the power of a level 16. No, it is still not too late. Lin Li shook his head instead. Probably only he knew that such a weird thing happened to him when he'd broken through. This feeling that was similar to being self-taught made Lin Li brim with confidence. Now, even if he were to face a true level 16 archmage, he would be confident enough to win. After all, what he had obtained just now was not just a level 16 incantation, but also a related core magical law that had been modified. Unfortunately, Matthias did not believe it. Unless you have suddenly broken through to level 17, just a single 1,000 miles of ice would not save you. Matthias was in the air, and his lips carried a scornful smile. He waved the magic staff in his hand, and the hellfire in the Aurora Square immediately vanished in the air. Afterward, there was a hasty recitation, and a gigantic net instantly appeared in front of Matthias. I'd be damned, rain of sacrifice. Hoffman's eyes were wide open instantly. This time, he clearly saw for himself that this Matthias was definitely the Ashen Warlock's disciple. It was because this Rain of Sacrifice was a spell created by the Ashen Warlock. People that had seen Rain of Sacrifice for the first time would most likely treat it as a normal Rain of Fire spell. Only people that truly understood the powers of the demons would understand that the destruction wrought by the Rain of Sacrifice would not be less than that of a level 18 spell. This process of casting this spell was not different from Rain of Fires, even the incantations were almost identical. It was only that before casting it, the demon that was summoned would have to be sacrificed as the price. Even a legendary powerhouse would have no choice but to feel somewhat fearful of that incomparable demonic power that was gained at that time. It's over. Hoffman's face instantly turned pale. Although Felix had just broken through to level 16 and obtained the genuine power of an archmage, the Rain of Sacrifice was no joke. Back when they were surrounding the Ashen Warlock, countless Sky Knights were instantly turned into ashes just by a single Rain of Sacrifice falling from the sky. Is that so? What about this? Lin Li only smiled, and waved the ether staff in his hands. This was followed by a swath of aquamarine light appearing. At the same time, Matthias' Rain of Sacrifice was released. In an instant, the whole sky was dyed red, and there were countless flares, swallowing Lin Li's body like a gigantic net immediately. It really is the Rain of Sacrifice. There were cries of shock coming from the spectator seats. The spectators that knew the prowess of the Rain of Sacrifice simultaneously started panicking for that mage from Gerosis. They knew how powerful the Rain of Sacrifice was, and they were even concerned whether this battle would come to a close with this Rain of Sacrifice. But immediately after, they saw a swath of aquamarine light radiating. Oh my God, it's Water Shield! There were waves of cries of alarm in that instance. The noise was not any softer than when the Rain of Sacrifice had appeared. A few of the mages that had inferior psychological quality had started to curse in their minds. F*ck, this fella called Felix is indeed not a normal monster. It was just an instant, and he had already used 2 level 16 spells in succession. They really wanted to ask, did you really just F*king break through to level 16? How is that I keep thinking and feeling that you are more experienced than those senior archmages that have been stuck at level 16 for tens of years? Honestly, the current Lin Li was really giving people such a feeling. He was terrifyingly proficient as though he had broken through to level 16 tens of years ago. Be it 1,000 miles of ice or water shield, they all seemed to be at his fingertips. There was no need to think or ponder. He only needed to instinctively recite, and he could exhibit the most suitable spell for the situation. Luckily, they were all only cursing in their minds. If Lin Li were to hear such words, this fellow would most likely shamelessly say, If you guys were the same as me, having tons of incantations and almost 10 core magical laws appearing in your mind while breaking through, then you guys would definitely be as proficient as me. In an instant, there were 1,000 meteors falling from the sky. Countless flares were dispersing, and there instantly were ripples appearing on the aquamarine light. Fuck, this guy really took some drugs, Lin Li gritted his teeth as he cursed. The prowess of the Rain of Sacrifice was definitely not something a normal spell could match up to. Tens of thousands of meteors landed on the aquamarine light, and it immediately made Lin Li feel dizzy and blinded. It was just an instant, yet the water shield was only left with the last thin layer. This time, it gave Lin Li such a fright that his hair stood up. While being panic-stricken, Lin Li hurriedly stimulated his mana to the maximum and desperately replenished the water shield that was on the verge of collapse. Fortunately, Lin Li was also a monster, and his near-infinite mana surged out. Although it was unable to reverse the adverse situation, it was still able to sufficiently maintain the water shield. Lin Li stared at Matthias while continuously conjuring mana. This guy was too abnormal. It had only been more than a month or so, yet he had already become so powerful. He consecutively used so many spells, and each was more sinister than the other. If it wasn't because Lin Li had broken through just now, he might have been pounded into meat sauce by that hellfire, not to mention this Rain of Sacrifice that was like plague, continuously sapping his mana. This terrifying corrosion was in effect for at least 10 seconds. It happened until a certain monster with infinite mana started feeling weak before the Rain of Sacrifice started to dissipate. At this point, Matthias' incantation started to near its end. The low and hoarse voice started to be sharp and loud like a warm-hearted prayer. A blue phosphorescent light started to ignite on Matthias' palm. The mental protection field became a gold brilliance and was steadfastly protecting mental protection field, preventing him from being affected by spells such as the mana retroaction. Felix in deep trouble now, Hoffman clenched his fists and stared right at the sky above the Aurora Square. I think this battle is coming to an end, Herza only gave out a slight sigh. This old man from the Supreme Council was very clear, even with his own powers that were near the legendary level, it would be difficult to change the situation in the Aurora Square. There was no choice, the disadvantage for the mage from Gerosis was too big. Matthias' incantation was coming to an end, and he was also under the protection of the mental protection field. There was a perfect mix of defense and offense, not allowing a single chance for the opponent. At this time, the only chance at victory would be to use absolute strength to destroy the mental protection field and deliver a fatal blow to Matthias with mana retroaction again. Otherwise, the only thing that was waiting for the mage from Gerosis would only be a painful defeat. The current Matthias had the strength of at least level 16. There was not a single chance to break down his mental protection field without a thorough understanding of the core magical laws and legendary level mental strength. This was because forcefully destroying the mental protection field was breaking magical laws in itself. Other than absolute strength, there was no other method. Sigh, Hoffman shook his head, and his fat face was filled with regret. Probably only Hoffman himself knew that the thing that truly made him regret was not that enormous wager, but the genuine genius that only appeared once in hundreds of years. This young man from the Gerosis Guild of Magic was a rare genius. Not only was his magical strength terrifying, he even had miraculous attainments in pharmaceutics. Not only did Hoffman have high opinion of him, even the person of authority for the Felon Kingdom's pharmaceutics, Balba, has expressed his admiration for this young man repetitively. It was such a pity. Just when Hoffman was shaking his head, there was a sudden change in the battle in the sky above the Aurora Square. The sharp and loud incantation suddenly stopped. It was like a large invisible hand had suddenly choked Matthias' throat. The whole Aurora Square went silent, and there was only a swoosh. Then, Matthias let out a shriek, and plummeted down from the sky just like a kite that had its string cut off. In that instant, every mage clearly saw that when Matthias struck the ground, there was blood spewing everywhere, and it left a red trace in the sky. Matthias had actually been injured. Nobody had thought that Matthias, who was dominating the whole match, would be injured at this time. One had to know the thousands of mages at the spectators' seats had even concluded together just now that Matthias would come out victorious in this match. In fact, the progress of the battle back then was indeed as such. But just a moment later, Matthias actually gave out a shriek, and then he plummeted down from the sky. This, what the fuck is happening? Almost everyone's mind had simultaneously came up with this question. Although Matthias had desperately used a levitation spell to stabilize his body at the instant when he fell to prevent himself from falling to his death, that pale face and weak magical wave as well as that pool of blood in the Aurora Square made it very obvious that Matthias was injured. Victory and defeat could change hands in an instant. This was how cruel and exciting a battle between mages could be. Of the thousands of spectators present, probably only those few with the best judgment like Aldwin and Los and Sendros would know what sort of shocking change had happened just now. As for the rest, they were still lost, with a face full of confusion. Even the strongest archmage, Mr. Macklin, who knew Lin Li the best, could only follow his habitual guessing. At that moment, that fella Felix must have done something bad. As for what it was, even Macklin was not too clear. What is going on again? This trial apprentice of yours is indeed a miracle creator. Constantly giving everyone surprises, Aldwin shook his head with a wry smile. If I am not mistaken, just now, Felix must have used strength, forcibly tearing through Matthias' mental protection field, and then he used a mana retroaction to disrupt the opponent's casting. As for that wind blade at the end, it could only be considered a given. What did you say? It was as if someone stepped on Macklin's tail. After a scream, he almost jumped up from his seat. Break. Broke through Matthias' mental protection field? It was fine if the president did not explain. After explaining, Macklin's face immediately turned ghastly pale. He was known as the strongest archmage. How could he not know what kind of power was needed to tear through the mental protection field? The mental strength of at least legendary level as well as the thorough understanding of the core magical laws. Just thinking about these two terrifying conditions, Macklin felt cold sweat all over his back. Forget about the mental strength, after all Felix, that fella, was a natural monster. No matter how strong his mental strength was, Macklin would not even be surprised, but the understanding of the core magical laws? It almost made Macklin go mad from fright on the spot. In the world of magic, rules were everything. The more proficient and more knowledgeable you were, the more powerful your power would be. This power was not referring to strength, but a realm that was hard to comprehend. It was like a butcher spoken of in legends. After butchering tens of thousands of times, his understanding of the cow's body would be very profound. At the end, he could use a small knife and dismember a cow in an instant with his eyes closed. Why was this butcher so legendary? It was because he already had the core rules of butchering cows within his grasp. A mage that had the core rules within his grasp was also another legendary butcher from a certain perspective, casting any spell at his own whim. With this small knife in hand, he could skip levels and challenge powerhouses far stronger than himself. Macklin was clearer than others as to how frightening this skipping of levels was. Looking at the Aurora Square again, Macklin's complexion changed. In his eyes, that young man floating in the sky was no longer the trial apprentice that had boundless prospects. He was now a genuine powerhouse that could defeat Macklin head-on. Macklin did not even have the courage to fight with his trial apprentice again, because he knew that if they were to duel again, he would not even have 40% chance of winning even when he was not suppressing his strength. A mage that had the core magical laws within his grasp was seriously too scary. Yet at this time, Matthias used a levitation spell to stabilize himself. He used his hand to touch his abdomen, and his hand was immediately covered in blood. I was still underestimating you, Matthias' voice seemed to have come from the abyss. That chilling aura was so bone-piercing that even the mages at the spectator's seat could not help but shiver. This feeling was too terrifying. It was like a demon from the abyss was staring at them with its faint eyes. Ahahaha, I agree, Lin Li laughed modestly, but his hands did not stop moving. He used his advantage of being in the air and shot out 10 more wind blades. It immediately forced Matthias to raise the elemental shield. The battle had progressed this far, and it had finally reached the rhythm that Lin Li liked the most. By using his immense mental strength and instantly casting low-level spells that were blinding fast to apply pressure, forcing the opponent to flee in panic while he himself was taking things easy, he could prepare another killer move. However, you will soon find out that an ant like you would never be able to harm a messenger from the abyss. While being pressured by the wind blade, Matthias was not distressed at all. Instead, his face displayed a cruel smile. Oh? Just when Lin Li was in a slight daze, Matthias had already reached out his right hand and took out a blood-red crystal from his pocket. Matthias seemed to have been possessed while holding the blood-red crystal tightly in his hands. His eyes were filled with madness. He was just like a gambler whose eyes were red from losing yet had suddenly gotten a good card. Now, Matthias' face was so swollen that it was contorted. It was abnormally hideous in the blood-red light. I've been waiting too long for this day. Matthias' gaze was filled with madness, but his voice seemed to be calm and suppressed. It was just like the calm before the storm, where the clouds in the sky were dense and thick. The hoarse voice spread across the Aurora Square, and the thousands of mages at the spectator seats could clearly hear it. When I was lying on the sickbed, I told myself again and again that one day I will let you experience the taste of your limbs being torn apart and being stepped on. I am really thankful to the Supreme Council for giving me this chance. Felix, open your eyes and take a look. What is the power of the messenger of the abyss? When Matthias' voice had just fallen, that blood-red crystal had been crushed by him with a crack. Afterward, blood-red mist started to seep out of the crystal like a plague. It instantly filled up the whole Aurora Square. Shit! Lin Li's head instantly tightened. He was a true master of mineral veins. In terms of the appraising of gemstones, even Anduin could not be compared to him. When he saw Matthias crush the crystal in his hand, Lin Li immediately remembered this was definitely a blood-eye crystal, a legendary sacred relic from the abyss. What the hell? The blood-eye crystal was no laughing matter. Even back at the Endless World, Lin Li had heard of this name before, but he never had the chance to see it with his own eyes. At this time, Lin Li's hair stood up. He had never imagined that Matthias would actually have such a lethal weapon in his hands. This was a genuine sacred relic from the abyss. Once the blood-eye crystal had been crushed, it would immediately create a gate of the abyss. Under the influence of the gate of the abyss, a mage that was proficient in demonic powers would not only see a raise in power, but he could even make minor changes to magical laws. Do not underestimate such minor changes. In the magical world, once it involves changes with the law, just a small change would very possibly trigger a true disaster. Such changes could be magical attributes, or even the magic structure. It could even be time and space. Nobody knew what would happen once the laws were changed, and nobody would dare to provoke a mage that had the ability to change laws. It was because this was often unexpected in the field of magic, which also meant that it was a legendary powerhouse at the very least. Even though almost 10 magical core magical laws appeared in Lin Li's mind, he could not help but feel a shiver down his spine. Fuck, what is this little bastard trying to do? Hoffman almost jumped up from his seat. His small eyes were wide open as though he had seen a ghost. This was not a joke. Once the gate of the abyss was open, the demonic power that was full of corrosive attribute would start to spread like a plague. Once it reached that point, even most of the thousands of mages at the spectator seats would start to demonize, not to mention that those two at the Aurora Square would not be able to escape. Too impulsive. At this time even Herza started to frown. At the moment when Matthias crushed the blood-eye crystal, Herza already knew that if this young man was not stopped, there might be a real disaster happening in the Aurora Square. Damn. With what this little as *hole Matthias did, we are all going to die. Macklin's exasperated scolding came from the VIP seats, but he had no solution to offer. It was because the blood-eye crystal in Matthias' hand had been crushed already. Amidst the blood-red mist, the profound and dark gate of the abyss had started to slowly appear. Sigh, Aldwin only shook his head, and gripped the magic staff in his hand tightly again. A long and complex incantation escaped his lips like flowing water. The incomparably intense magical waves were filled with a threatening aura. The brilliance from the tip of the magic staff was as bright as a scorching sun. Furthermore, the brilliance got brighter as Aldwin's recitation got louder and louder. At the end, the blinding brilliance seemed to have covered the entire Aurora Square. At this time, even people like Sendros that were sitting nearby had started to feel alarmed. All the while, they had only heard that Aldwin was the strongest mage in the whole Felon Kingdom, but they had never witnessed how strong this strongest mage actually was until today. At the climax of today's duel, they had finally seen that the power of Aldwin had far surpassed their imagination. It was because the field of magic that this president of Alana's Guild of Magic had was actually the Void Barrier. This was the legendary absolute defense. Accordingly, when bodies were under the protection of the Void Barrier, even time would not have any effect on them. Furthermore, the Void Barrier that Aldwin cast had reached everywhere. The whole Aurora Square was under the protection of the Void Barrier. The dazzling white light appeared, and Matthias' Gate of the Abyss was like a child's play now. No matter how that red mist pervaded the area, it was unable to reach the spectators' seats. It was like an invisible wall had separated the Aurora Square into two different worlds. Hell! A loud roar came from the Aurora Square, and Lin Li anxiously turned around to take a look, frightened. Yet, he saw Matthias tightly gripping his fists, and his distorted but hideous face was filled with pain. What made Lin Li confused and panic-stricken was that there seemed to be something hidden under Matthias' black robe, and that it was wriggling in accordance with his roars of pain. It can't be, Lin Li's expression immediately froze. He suddenly remembered that other than raising the power of a mage, the Gate of the Abyss could be used for something else. Just when Lin Li was dumbfounded, Matthias let out another roar of pain. Immediately after, Lin Li saw a pair of black wings tearing open the robe, being exposed to everyone's gaze in a strange and weird manner. Just in the blink of an eye, Matthias' body had undergone a complete change. The current him had already lost all features as a human being, and seemed to look like a real demon. His whole body was covered in scales, which gave people goosebumps when they looked at them. His handsome face had been completely distorted. Two weird magewefts stretched from his forehead all the way to the corner of his mouth, filled with a devilish hideousness. There was single horn extending from his forehead as though a tumor growing out. The pair of black wings spread in the wind, and when it whipped up a gust, it even brought forth a thick bloody scent. There was an incomparable demonic aura emanating from the Aurora Square. It gave Lin Li goosebumps. Now, Lin Li finally understood. No wonder Matthias could obtain such powers within a month. No wonder the Ashen Warlock was willing to have him as a disciple and even unselfishly taught him everything about a spell like the Rain of Sacrifice. It turns out this was the reason why. Matthias has a genuine devil's lineage. All the way till now, Lin Li had always thought that Matthias crushed the Blood-Eye Crystal to summon the Gate of the Abyss. Now, Lin Li finally understood. He had actually forgotten that the Blood-Eye Crystal was called the Sacred Relic of the Abyss, and other than being able to summon the Gate of the Abyss, it could even allow those that inherited the devil's lineage to awaken. Although the period of awakening was not long, within this time frame, Matthias, who had the devil's lineage, could allow himself to turn into a true demon. Furthermore, the devil's lineage that Matthias had inherited definitely belonged to some powerful demon monarch. It was because only by inheriting a devil monarch's lineage would there be a pair of majestic-looking wings and a single peculiar horn. In the world of the Abyss, these two unique characteristics represented strength and status. F***ck, it's going to be really troublesome now. The awakening of the devil's monarch lineage was naturally a terrifying thing. It meant that Matthias would have the power of at least level 18 for a short period of time. Furthermore, his actual body was inside the Gate of the Abyss. While being affected by the power of the Gate of the Abyss, his power would be multiplied. He could even make minor changes to magical laws. Facing such a terrifying monster, Lin Li did not have a single chance at victory even if he were to become more powerful. Seems like I would have to drink something again. Lin Li shook his head. He reached into his pocket with a face full of frustration and took out a small and exquisite glass bottle from inside. The glass bottle contained a transparent liquid, which did not seem thick. Under the sunlight, it was sparkling and crystal clear, just like normal water, but when Lin Li held it in his hands, he was unusually careful. It was because what this glass bottle contained was a potion that Lin Li used 2 days and a whole black lotus to concoct. Roar! Just when Lin Li had opened the glass bottle and was about to drink the potion, Matthias, who was on the ground, suddenly roared. After that, he spread his black wings and instantly flew toward Lin Li just like a gigantic bat. F***CK. While facing the charging Matthias, Lin Li had no choice but to retreat. Even an idiot knew that a demon's physical and magical strength was overbearing. Even though Lin Li was a special kind of mage that was a blacksmith guru as well, he did not dare to engage in close combat with Matthias either. But Matthias did not give him this chance. He retracted his wings quickly and seemed to have transformed into a black arrow, instantly shooting towards Lin Li. After that, he threw out a punch. In that instant, Lin Li felt like his chest had been smashed by an iron hammer. Even his bones seemed to have been crushed into pieces. After Matthias managed to inflict that blow, he laughed hideously. His fists landed heavily on Lin Li like a heavy rain. The awakening of the devil's lineage had caused Matthias to transform from a physically weak man into a completely different person. Now, his mighty blows were like boulders that run over Lin Li's body. Lin Li winced in pain as if his bones were all broken. Damn, Lin Li endured the 10 blows from behind his frost shield. But, he finally found a chance to escape the storm-like attacks with Matthias' oversight. Lin Li wiped fresh blood off the edge of his mouth. His hands were trembling a lot, and he had no strength to control his body. Lin Li could only make use of the levitation spell to hover unsteadily in the air. Everything beneath him seemed tilted. Even the Aurora Square looked unusually distorted as if it was folded by someone. In Lin Li's eyes, the thousands of mages appeared to own multiple shadows that overlapped with each other. Lin Li rubbed his eyes to see more clearly. However, the moment his hands touched them, he saw blood on his hands. It was then that he realized that blood was coming out from his eyes, ears, mouth, and nose. Matthias' continuous attacks might have injured his organs. Don't worry, this is just the beginning. Matthias' hoarse laughter was like the cry of an owl. When he laughed, the 2 mage-teeth on his cheeks distorted hideously. Lin Li drew in big mouthfuls of air and stubbornly replied, "I'm not worried at all." He forced out a smile and raised up his ether staff. The frost shield pieced itself back together, and generated a bright light up the sky. What followed was the potent spell, hastening spell, hemophilic spell, stone skin spell, and other types of energy boosters. At that point of time, Lin Li could feel that he was wrapped in a blinding light, red, orange, yellow, green, blue, purple, like a dazzling rainbow. What a joke, Matthias smirked as a smile surfaced on his scaly face. To him, the mage from Gerosis had to be joking. His own devil's lineage had just awakened, and his ability was comparable to that of a high-level magical beast. If he wanted, he could simply tear him into pieces. What were energy boosters to him? Could it be that the Gerosis mage still wanted to make use of the boosters to personally battle with himself? Matthias really wanted to advise him to give up resisting. There was no use, with himself being physically stronger. Not to mention the hastening spell and potent spell, even if Lin Li had the help from a legendary-level priest as well as the legendary theurgy from a divine, he would not be able to win against the devil's lineage, which had been awakened. Seeing that his opponent was desperately doing his recitation to maintain the energy boosters, Matthias suddenly had the thrill of being in a cat-and-mouse chase. Although he had always wanted to kill his opponent, he was not in a hurry when he had gained absolute advantage over him. He levitated quietly to look at the trivial spells Lin Li was trying to cast. He was elated by the definite power he had claimed. Matthias had gotten a hold of the momentum of the battle. The extreme gush of energy from the awakening gave him undue confidence. He could end the battle with a victory by tearing the Gerosis mage into pieces any time he wanted. However, he was not in a rush. He loved the euphoria he got from the power difference between the cat and the mouse. Seeing how the mouse struggled helplessly gave the cat greater satisfaction as compared to killing it in one go. What Matthias wanted to do now was to smash all the tiny sense of hope he could give his opponent. He was going to do this again and again until his opponent fell into a state of hopelessness. Then, he was going to kill him with the most brutal methods. Matthias hovered in the air quietly as he looked at his opponent from above. Then, he swooped towards him. He was like a vampire amidst the red mist, giving off ominous and hair-standing vibes. F*ck, this bastard, Hoffman glared at Matthias angrily. That scoundrel was too terrifying. How would Hoffman not be aware of the situation Matthias was in? To a certain extent, the energy of a dark conjurer was as good as from the devil itself, just not as direct as how Matthias got his. Among the thousands of audience present, Hoffman knew Matthias the best. Looking at how Matthias' black wings spread, the hideous horn on his head, the two mage wefts on his cheeks, as well as his scaly body, one could not help but feel goosebumps all over him. If Hoffman remembered correctly, the leader of the 7th level abyss, Lord of Destruction, Batu, looked exactly like this. Batu was a devil at the Lord level. It was at the tip of the food chain on the 7th level of the abyss. No legendary man would dare to raise his head to look at it. Although Matthias was born generations after Batu, and inherited 1/10 of its ability after the awakening, and so he was much more powerful compared to Felix, who had just reached level 16 of the Archmage realm. Hoffman was not the only one who was in panic. Macklin was sitting there anxiously as well. Although he did not say much, his hands were clenched. The battle was really overboard. It surpassed the level of a battle that was only supposed to involve trial students. Especially Matthias, he had become a monster. Not to mention his invincible strength, he also had great resistance against magical spells. He could clearly see Felix casting 3 spells on him in one go. However, 2 of them were like throwing meat buns at a dog, disappearing almost immediately. While the delaying spell worked a little, Matthias still managed to dash towards Lin Li after a few seconds as though he had consumed aphrodisiac. God damn it, how can they fight like this? The scariest thing for Macklin was the fact that Matthias had only consumed half of his energy. From the beginning, he had always been using his body to fight like a warrior. The awakening had not just brought him invincible strength, but also similar magical ability. The greatness would then be amplified by a few times when Matthias got under the influence of the Gate of the Abyss. Doomed, doomed. Everything is really doomed. At this time even Macklin, who always had extreme confidence in Lin Li, lost nearly all his hope. He had no choice. Matthias was too powerful. His might was beyond reasonable. What should we do? Macklin's voice shook. He could not stand it anymore. What if Felix were to die in the Aurora Square? It would bring a real tragedy to the entire Guild of Magic. Anduin's rage was not what the Guild of Magic could deal with. Macklin's gaze naturally landed onto Aldwin. Now, he could only wait for Aldwin to intervene in the battle once more. Or else, when Matthias had his fun from the cat and mouse game, it would be too late. Macklin had given up rooting for Felix to become the victor of the battle. No matter what, he needed to ensure the safety of Felix. He was too important to the Guild of Magic. Let's wait first, Aldwin replied as he shook his head gently. Although his voice was very low, his tone was filled with firmness. Still wait? Don't worry, Felix still has chance. Apart from Macklin, the thousands of mages were also extremely nervous. Their hearts were at their throats while they waited for Matthias' attack. Now, even a fool could tell that Matthias had absolutely claimed the upper hand in the battle. One attack would suffice to defeat his opponent. However, after witnessing the miracles the Gerosis mage had created for them, they were all secretly hoping for another miracle from him. The anticipation that was filled with contradiction made the competition become a torment for them. Finally, Matthias moved. He spread his black wings with force and swooped towards Lin Li. He was like a sharp arrow aiming at Lin Li's chest. The Aurora Square fell silent immediately. Instantly, everyone could see a fist landing roughly on Felix, causing him to fall on the ground. Immediately, they realized that it was just their imagination. Felix was not only unaffected by the punch, but he appeared behind Matthias almost immediately. He was as quick as the wind. What followed was a POM. No one expected that the first blow given by Felix would be a punch too. Matthias was stunned by the disappearance of his opponent. His attack was supposed to end the battle. When he realized what had happened, and wanted to attack, the fist of his opponent landed on his back like a bomb. Under the extreme impact, he felt as though he was torn into pieces. Then, Matthias was like a kite with a broken string. He fell from the sky at once. Fuck. Where did that monster came from? The quiet Aurora Square was filled with gasps at once. The sudden change was like a thunder that roared above their heads. At that moment, everyone's head buzzed. No one believed what they saw to be true. It was that unbelievable. How could a skinny and weak mage be able to inflict such a magnificent blow? His blow was as strong as thunder and as fast as mad wind. He was definitely a monster in disguise. Aurora Square was filled with a deafening silence. Everybody's gazes were fixed on the two men on the ground. The prolonged battle had been testing their emotional capacity, with hair-raising exchanges one after another. Lin Li's sudden progression into level 16, Matthias' awakening, and the never-ending miracles had caused everyone to think that they had be accustomed to surprises. Yet, when Lin Li demonstrated his almighty close-quarters attacks, nearly half of the mages in the audience went mad after seeing it. Lin Li's sudden second wind had pushed the battle to the climax. Lin Li's fist made Matthias fall onto the ground. Although Matthias did not expect that, it was a fact that his devil's lineage had been awakened. How would he be defeated so easily? When he fell, he spread his black wings almost instantly. He managed to stabilize himself, then hissed and generated huge torrent-like magical waves. The dazzling sparks from the rain of sacrifice were like shooting stars falling from the sky, and created a raging storm. At the same time, Lin Li also summoned his water shield. While gripped his ether staff, his recitation flowed out like gushing water from his larynx. Instantaneously, the temperature in the Aurora Square fell. There were snowflakes and bone-chilling wind in the air. Amidst the flames, the crystal-like snowflakes looked brilliant. When the two strong spells clashed with each other, torrents of elements erupted. While the 1,000 miles of ice came by, the snowflakes and fire sparks came into close contact with each other. After casting the rain of sacrifice, Matthias roared again. Everybody could see multicolored elemental fragments rising up to the sky. They became a perfect barrier that blocked off the chilly air given out by 1,000 miles of ice. What followed was Matthias spreading his pair of black wings and swooping like a sharp arrow towards Lin Li. The battle between them was never-ending. Their exchanges were filled with increasing intensity, and each attack generated more and more impact. Seconds trickled by, and it got to the evening in the blink of an eye. The setting sun painted the Aurora Square with a blood-red hue. It amplified the eerie and foreboding atmosphere. "It seems that I have misjudged you," Matthias hissed while he panted heavily. Although the devil's lineage within him had awakened, and he inherited part of the power of Batu, the Lord of Destruction, he could no longer stand such a huge energy usage. Throughout the arduous battle, both men unleashed many spells that were beyond level 15. On top of that, the strenuous and up-close wrestling they had with each other had drained Matthias, not only physically, but also mentally. He had reached his limit. "Same here," Lin Li replied. Although he was not as worn out as Matthias, underlying his voice was a sense of fatigue. Even if he were to have unlimited mana, the intensity of the prolonged battle had caused him to feel a tiredness like never before. However, one time is enough. Now, enjoy while you can. This will be the last beautiful sunset for you. Matthias scowled, and let out a shrilling cry. At once, blood-red smoke filled the Aurora Square. From afar, it was as though the red fog had solidified. At the same time, shocking transformations occurred on Matthias' body. The tightly packed black scales became really bright and shiny as though they were a set of brand new armor. His horn, which stood straight upwards on his head, emitted a faint light. His black wings spread out energetically and turned red amidst the red fog. Matthias was like a real vampire. He was all menace and hideous under his blood-red wings. F***ck. The audience gasped. This time even a fool would be able to tell that Matthias' power became many times greater. His original ability that surpassed that of an archmage became very near to that of a guru. He gave off an extremely terrifying vibe, and the audience could not help but feel threatened by it. That energy was not supposed to be owned by a normal human. Now, Matthias gave off a vibe that was really similar to the Lord of Destruction. Matthias' sudden energy, however, did not surprise Lin Li at all. He slowly put the ether staff back into the ring of endless storm. Matthias' recitation hastened. The red fog in the Aurora Square seemed to be under control. It swirled ominously like a huge whirlpool, and swallowed everything around it crazily. When air and sunlight came into contact with the blood-red whirlpool, they could not avoid their fate of being swallowed by it, either. At once, the Aurora Square was all blood-red. **T. That's the Crimson Adjudication!" Hoffman exclaimed as his eyes widened. He lived in the breezy plains with the Ashen Warlock, so while he did not have too many interactions with him, he knew that butcher in the arena was casting the Crimson Adjudication. It was the spell the Ashen Warlock was the proudest of. All of a sudden, the audience became quiet, they held their breath. It was like the silence before the storm, as though the gray clouds in the sky were oppressive. Everyone was very fearful for the young mage from Gerosis. They even felt like telling him to leave this place immediately. However, it was too late. While the blood-red whirlpool swirled madly, it was as though time had frozen. Lin Li hovered in the air, quietly, and took out something from the ring of endless storm, slowly. It was a crossbow that he had only used thrice since he came to Amril. The first time was at the Shadow Glen, the second was at the Black Hills town, while the third was at the Fire Plume Ridge. Every time, it allowed him to escape calamity. "Freak, what is Felix thinking?" Macklin muttered. The recitation had made him really anxious. His eyes was fixed on the two students in the ring. Sigh, at this time even Aldwin shook his head. The gates of the abyss had appeared, and the recitation of the Crimson Adjudication had begun. No matter how powerful he was, Aldwin would not be able to stop the catastrophe that was about to happen. The only thing he could do was to transfer his mana into the void barrier to minimize the impact the Crimson Adjudication was about to bring. Lin Li was still hovering in the air quietly. He reached his hand into the ring of endless storm again and took out a thin hollow spike. Under the sunset, the black hollow spike had a faint glow. Lin Li touched its tip and positioned it in the slot of the crossbow. His actions were slow and precise, just as though he was caressing the long hair of a sweetheart. "Oh my God! Felix, run!" Macklin was so angry that he stomped his feet. However, his cries were not of any help to the matter at hand. With the void barrier established, Lin Li would not be able to hear his voice. The act of holding the crossbow in his hand and putting the hollow spike into position gave Lin Li a great sense of nostalgia. He remembered how he had the Stars of Fury with him in the Endless World very long ago. His surroundings did not matter to him. He did not care about the swirling blood-red fog nor the mages in the audience seats. His focus was placed on the crossbow in his hands and the faint red glow before him. That was right. It was the source of the Blood-Eye Crystal, the location of the center of the gates of the abyss. Perhaps it was the mental energy that Lin Li gave off, or the presence of the hollow spike when he raised his crossbow, but Matthias' recitation accelerated. At once, everybody could sense a thick stench of blood filling the Aurora Square. "I'm sorry, Matthias. My good luck might be continuing." The moment Lin Li spoke, he casually pulled the trigger. The sharp hollow spike shot out. The sound of it flying off was like an alarm, terrifying the audience. What followed was a loud clang. Boom! The hollow spike was like a shooting star that ruthlessly stabbed that faint red glow. At that instant, it was as though the entire world had lost its colors. The ominous whirlpool dispersed all of a sudden, leaving the entire Aurora Square in a cloud of ash. At the same time, Lin Li's figure became blurred. He was like a ghost that crept behind Matthias without any warning. What followed was a harsh punch on Matthias' back. Before Matthias could react, Lin Li had already turned his body and threw at least 10 wind blades towards him like a machine gun. Although Matthias had the protection from his scales, he got injuries all over in the blink of an eye. When he had gotten a hold of the momentum, Lin Li did not give Matthias any more chances. He let out a strong wave of mana and forced Matthias to the edge of destruction. This can't be, Darien was stunned. He stared at Lin Li as though he saw a ghost. He was full of sweat and his face ashened. A bony hand was covering his mouth tightly, stopping his urge to scream. Darien was the only man among the thousands of mages who was aware of Matthias' ability. That was due to the pact he had made long ago with Matthias' mentor, Aaron. The ability of an archmage and that of someone with a devil's lineage was definitely not something Darien would have expected the trial students to associate themselves with. He even started to doubt if it was even necessary to help Aldwin with the 4 master-level mageweaths. But, he knew very quickly that it was indeed a necessary act. It was utmost necessity. The mage from Gerosis was a monster. The spells he had been casting became more and more terrifying as the battles progressed. Those were enough to cause hearts to skip beats. However, Darien realized those were nothing. Why would its powerful methods even matter if the monster could cast 60 pyroblasts right from the beginning? However, no one, not even Darien, had expected the Gerosis mage to have the ability to fight with Matthias. What Matthias had inherited was the Lord of Destruction's, Batu's, ability. Even if he did not inherit the entire skill set, it was adequate for him to slay all his opponents. But now, Matthias, who was supposed to slay his opponents with ease, had lost his powers from the gates of the abyss due to a crossbow bolt. His strength and speed declined gradually. He also needed more time to recite his spells now. On the other side, the young mage from Gerosis became more and more powerful. He had forced Matthias to the edge in just the blink of an eye. His black wings were broken and his scales had lost its shine. He reeked of blood while it gushed out of his wounds profusely. Before this, he had still been making plans on how to play the cat and mouse game with Lin Li. Now, he was like a dying dog, pinned down for a good beating. After falling from the sky, the emotion on Matthias' expression was all shock. He could not understand how that mage from Gerosis got his powers to defeat him, who had his devil's lineage awakened. It was unbelievable. He felt so weak, and had no strength to return the attacks. He could only see his opponent punch his face, continuously, like a heavy hammer. At that moment, the Aurora Square was really silent. The only sound was the sound of the fists hitting his face. Matthias could only protect his head with his hands, to minimize his injuries. Lin Li was never a forgiving person. His anger from the unexpected beating that Matthias gave him just now already accumulated much anger in him. Now that he finally got the chance to reciprocate with harsher attacks, why would he choose not to? Furthermore, he had had to use the entire Black Lotus to create the unrelenting potion. If he did not beat Matthias into a moron, wouldn't he waste that Black Lotus? He was like a different person now. His speed was faster than that of a mad wind, and his strength was stronger than a thunderbolt. Matthias was like a hilarious clown before him. He was like a sandbag that was beaten up harshly by Lin Li. Matthias could not struggle or resist at all. The crazy attacks turned Lin Li's eyes red with bloodlust. He grabbed onto Matthias' throat tightly and smashed his scaly body onto the ground. Bam! Instantaneously, cracks appeared on the firm ground. Matthias sank into the debris, and the air was filled with dust and small rock fragments. The Aurora Square became silent at once. Hoffman swallowed his saliva strenuously, his eyes almost popped out of their sockets. Never had he expected that the gentlemanly and talented pharmacist would have such an extreme thirst for blood. He was so violent and fierce, just like a gladiator that would partake in a deadly battle. At this time, Hoffman was really doubting his decision to use Lin Li. He wondered if it was a good choice to strike a deal with this man. No matter what, the battle on the Aurora Square would be ending soon. Matthias was at the edge of death. His body was covered with wounds of different sizes, and he even had his horn broken off by Lin Li. His shrill cries sounded as though they came from the deepest of hells. The audience couldn't help but feel a chill down their spines and goosebumps all over. How is it, Mage Matthias? Now you should know that it is not just luck that brought me where I am, right? Lin Li asked menacingly as he gave Matthias a harsh kick and sent him deeper into the debris. Matthias coughed forcefully while he stood in the middle of the debris. Fresh blood flowed out from his mouth as though someone opened a floodgate. Yet, his eyes were filled with an uncompromising expression. So what? Have you forgotten about the Emerald Tower already? So it was really you. The mention of the Emerald Tower changed Lin Li's expression immediately. This time, he finally could ascertain that the Marathon family was providing support to the Shadow's Nest. Tell me, why would the Marathon family do that? Why? Ha ha ha. Although he was at a disadvantage, the carefree Matthias was still able to laugh. If you want to know the reason, why don't you kneel down before me? If you beg me, I might consider telling you. Mage Matthias, you are very insensible. Seeing Matthias' desperate struggle, Lin Li showed zero excitement. He only had a cruel smile on his face. Perhaps my flaming hand could make you wiser. Almost immediately, Lin Li already bashed a flaming hands onto Matthias. Ah! Matthias let out a shriek. A stone-hearted person would have become sympathetic for him. It was a torture for Matthias. His dashing cheeks were like raw meat on the griller, one could see skin sizzle under the flaming hand. At once, a plume of smoke rose up into the air. Furthermore, Lin Li was determined to make Matthias suffer. After using the flaming hand, he was not in a rush to let go. He held on to Matthias' face for a good 10 seconds, before putting out the flames reluctantly. When he removed his hand, Matthias' handsome face was badly burnt. Under the charred ashes, there was a messy mix of torn skin, flesh, and fresh blood. 9 out of 10 wouldn't believe the monster used to have the ideal appearance that women loved just 10 seconds ago. How was it, Mage Matthias? Do you feel better now? Heh, heh, Matthias' laughter sounded as though it was being forced out of his mouth. It carried a heavy nasal tone, which no one could tell if it was from laughing or crying. So what? Do you have the guts to kill me? I'm the heir of the Marathon family. If you were to kill me, my father will make everyone die with me. This includes those morons in Gerosis, as well as that foolish fatso. Oh, yes. Before I forget, do you want to know who was the mastermind behind the invasion? Ha ha ha, stop guessing. It was me, Matthias. Does this sound exciting to you? Exciting? Damn you, little piece of sh*t. Lin Li raged as he stepped onto Matthias with great force. Matthias was in such an excruciating pain that his back arched. Although it would have been unbearable to normal people, Matthias was determined to endure it. Such extraordinary perseverance put a frown on Lin Li's forehead. He was extremely clear of the cruelty of the flaming hand. It was used with the intention of killing Matthias in the first place. He did not expect that Matthias could still withstand the torture the flaming hand brought him, but, after pondering it for a while, he decided to put these concerns in the back of his mind. Since Matthias had admitted himself that he had been the mastermind behind Shadow's Nest's attack on the Emerald Tower, Lin Li naturally did not have a reason to let him off. He had to pay for the death of so many mages and the loss of the Emerald Tower with his blood. The revenge of the Marathon family can wait until they are dead. Mage Matthias, you might have forgotten my personality. I may be lacking in everything else, just not my guts. Lin Li reached his hands into the ring of endless storm for the pair of vampire fangs. Then, he realized something was amiss. If he was not wrong, Matthias was looking at the VIP seats with a different expression. Darien? The sudden realization put a frown on Lin Li's forehead. Logically, Matthias was the one who wanted to kill him. Hence, it would only be reasonable for him to glare at Lin Li. Yet, why was Matthias' gaze not fixed on his opponent, but on Darien, who was seated in the VIP section? Could there be something between them? Yet, although Darien was a clever man, he was not in the guild ever since his nephew, Madrick, got into trouble. Hence, Macklin did not really include him in the preparation of both the Shadowglan's trial and the finals in the Aurora Square. Apart from helping Aldwin establish the 4 master-level mage wells the day before, he was not part of the entire finals at all. Even if he had any undisclosed relationship with Matthias, he should not have much chance to do anything. Wait a minute. Mageweth? When the word Mageweth came to his mind, Lin Li guessed the issue immediately. That's right. It's the Mageweth. No, no, no. You will not dare to kill me, Matthias said with utmost confidence. In reality, he still did not believe that the Gerosis bumpkin would dare to injure him. Being injured from a battle and being killed in it were two different matters. Even if he was not afraid of the revenge by the Marathon family, could he not think about the future of the Gerosis Guild of Magic instead? If he were to kill him, the rage from Marathon family would not be something a small guild of magic could deal with, and it was this belief that gave Matthias that confidence. Although he seemed to be the losing party, Matthias had no concern for his life. In fact, he was also calculating another matter. He was planning how to lead the Gerosis bumpkin into the trap he had prepared for him. Lin Li shook his head, and said nothing. He just muttered a spell, and countless red vines covered the Aurora Square like tide water. It's the bloodvine spell again. Before the audience could calm down, the crazy bloodvines grabbed Matthias' body. It was as though those blood-red vines had their own consciousness. The moment they caught on to Matthias' body, their prickles sunk into his flesh like leeches, sucking his sweet fresh blood hungrily. Matthias let out a weak scream. It was as though he had his throat strangled by someone. The audience was dumbfounded. Everybody stared at that scene blankly. Aldwin shook his head, and a bitter smile surfaced on his face. This old man who had been managing the Alana for decades felt that he was out of control for the first time. The battle was a disaster. Although he had already intervened in the flow of the finals, he could not change the end result. The silence in the Aurora Square was deafening. There was only sound from the growing bloodvines. A bloodvine that was filled with blood climbed around Matthias' neck. It was like a poisonous snake. Everyone could tell that if it were to tighten further, the heir of the Marathon family would die in the Aurora Square. Mage Felix, please let him go. At this time, 10 warriors clad in armor burst out from the crowd. Their leader looked to be over 30 years of age and resembled Matthias. Lin Li suddenly remembered that he was the same man he'd met in the Fire Plume Ridge. That man was with Argus when they visited the Silver Hand to ask Serena about his whereabouts. Oh, yes. Serena told him that this man, named God, was the cousin of Matthias, and the nephew of Wilhelm. The gravity of the situation made God lose the cool he'd had back in the Fire Plume Ridge. He brought the team of warriors through the crowd and barged into the Aurora Square. The 2 judges who had been hiding in the corner got shoved away by the warriors. Get off. God was aware that he was in the Aurora Square, and knew that it was the day of the finals. After bringing his team in, he only asked the judges to stand aside, and did nothing intrusive. The group of men in armor were also left at the edge of the Aurora Square. He walked up to Lin Li alone and stood a few meters in front of him. Mage Felix, please think of Master Wilhelm and give Matthias a chance. Lin Li glanced at him and said nothing. He secretly dispersed his mental energy while scanning the 4 mageweths that were tampered with by someone. At the same time, he controlled the strength of the bloodvines to ensure that they did not wrap Matthias too loosely or tightly. He let Matthias hang there lifelessly. Mage Felix, you are a smart man. I'm sure you know that you gain nothing if you kill Matthias. You had already won this battle. Why are you creating more trouble for yourself? Yet, Lin Li could not care about God's patient advice. At this time, his gaze was on a sky-blue-colored streak of mageweth on his right. It was between a few cracked stone slabs, and at least 10 meters away from him. As the guru of inscription, Lin Li could tell straight away that it was a bipolar mageweth. Its mana was supported by 2 level 15 magic element crystals, namely ice and fire. It had a total of 33 magic nodes and 14 magic circuits. The reason for its existence was to balance out the clash between magic from the two elements. Within the area it covered, the impact of the magic would be minimized. While the same flaming storm could burn a cargo ship outside, it could only burn a long robe inside the area. However, when Lin Li's gaze fell onto the ManhwaRecap, he frowned. While there were indeed 33 magic nodes, there was a lack of the most crucial magic circuit. Lin Li remembered that there should be one more magic circuit near the source of the mana. This magic circuit would be the one that would ensure the balance between the ice and fire elements. This magic circuit was absolutely vital on the bipolar ManhwaRecap. Without it, the entire bipolar ManhwaRecap would be incredibly dangerous. It was difficult to stabilize the energy between ice and fire elements by itself. If the concentration of either magical element were to get higher than the critical point, the balance would be broken. Then, it would engulf the person who cast the spell. Darien is indeed a talent, Lin Li muttered sarcastically. To be honest, at first, he did not believe such a narrow-minded man would be able to craft such a comprehensive conspiracy. Unfortunately, he had used it at the wrong place. To play tricks in front of an inscription master was insignificant. Lin Li did not need to do anything much on his side. He only needed to release a small sense of mental energy to change the entire bipolar ManhwaRecap. In reality, Lin Li only tweaked the bite of mana effect brought about by the mana imbalance such that it became a magic sequence that would allow direct attacks. Mage Felix, God drew a breath after realizing that Lin Li was not responsive to his persuasion. Could you let Matthias down first? I'm afraid that those bloodvines might let him down? Sure. Lin Li raised the ether staff in his hand. A dark red glow flashed past. Immediately, the numerous bloodvines dispersed like snow under the sunlight. Matthias stood himself up with his staff. The loss of blood had made him really dizzy and weak. Thank you, God thanked Lin Li after seeing the blood-red vines disappear and Matthias get down. He sighed, and just when he wanted to continue thanking him, he felt gentle magical waves around him. The magical waves were not vigorous. They were like ripples on the surface of a calm lake. The magical waves from Lin Li were not vigorous, but caused the imbalance of the ice and fire elements in such a sensitive environment. At once, countless wind blades came flying in like butterflies. Matthias, who had just got away from the bloodvines, had no time to understand the situation. A wind blade slit his throat. Mage Felix, when God realized something was amiss, and wanted to stop it, but it was too late. He could only watch while the wind blade cut Matthias' throat. Hey, this is not my fault anymore, Lin Li said innocently as he rubbed his nose. Frankly speaking, he was not wrong. When the blood-red vines dispersed, Lin Li did not attack Matthias at all, he did not even touch his hair. Now, even Macklin could not help but frown. What is this kid doing? He was still wondering why Lin Li did not choose to kill Matthias at such a good chance. Then, he realized that Aldwin's bipolar ManhwaRecap failed due to the overconcentration of elements. What followed was Matthias falling straight onto the ground. God was stupefied. He'd never thought that it would end this way. Matthias' death was too absurd. Although he knew it was the doing of the Gerosis mage, he had no proof. Thousands of mages saw very clearly that Matthias was killed by a random wind blade. His death was not related to Felix at all. Since the grounds belonged to Alana Guild of Magic, God could not do much without credible evidence. Even though he was the nephew of Wilhelm, the only thing he could do was grit his teeth and snap at Lin Li. Mage Felix, I will report everything to Master Wilhelm. After saying that, God walked out of the Aurora Square, and exited Alana Guild of Magic with the team of fully armored warriors. The ultimate victory goes to Felix from the Gerosis. Herz's voice was very clear. At this time, the audience who were stunned got back to reality. A round of thunderous applause filled the arena. The 2-month-long trial might appear to have ended with the applause. However, to most people, it was just the start. The battle concluded with the cheers. Lin Li waited for Kevin anxiously while he listened to Macklin nag by his ear. Darn you, fella. How many times have I told you not to find trouble for yourself? Now that you did such a cruel thing, how would Wilhelm forgive you and Jerosis? Alright, there were still many unsolved mysteries behind the attack of the Emerald Tower. Lin Li did not intend to tell that to the old man at all. He stood there obediently and listened to the old man nag. It was only when the old man's throat went dry from all the nagging that Lin Li interrupted. Oh, yes. There's something I want to discuss with you. What is it? I am going back to Jerosis tonight. Huh? Why are you so rushed? Something happened to the Emerald Tower and Jirian asked me to return quickly. Could you delay it? Macklin frowned hesitantly. The trial had just finished. The guild must have planned some celebration. If the main character is not here, how are we going to celebrate? Furthermore, your performance at the finals was historic. The Supreme Council is sure to reward you for that. If you leave, you are going to miss out on all the good stuff. I have no choice too. Jirian said it was urgent. Lin Li pursed his lips and pushed the blame to Jirian. Jirian, that bastard. Oh, yes. If I don't remember wrongly, the bet between the Guild of Magic and the Adventurers Guild should be after 3 months, right? Don't worry, I will think of a way to come back to Alana no matter how busy I will be. When Herza announced the winner, the trial also came to an end. Aldwin said some scripted things to praise all the trial students for their performance, thank the Supreme Council, as well as the audience. When he waited for Kevin to come with the coach, Lin Li greeted the VIPs ceremoniously. Since they had met each other at the Pharmacists Guild, they were still familiar with each other. Especially so for Inglos, Sendros, and Hoffman, they had rendered great help when Oren got injured previously. How could he not greet them now? The VIPs were also extra friendly to him. Their tone when they called him Master Felix became sweeter and sweeter, especially Hoffman. After he heard that Lin Li was going to build a guild of magic in Breezy Plains, he smiled so hard that his eyes nearly closed. It was no joke to have such a powerful neighbor. As long as he could establish a good relationship with him, the Glitter Gold Trade Union would stand to benefit a lot. When Macklin saw such friendliness, he could not help but scold Hoffman under his breath for his opportunistic behavior. After greeting the VIPs, Herza had a long chat with Lin Li. It was nothing important, just regarding Lin Li's good performance in the finals, and telling him that the Supreme Council would be rewarding him for his efforts. At the same time, he also talked about the building of the new Guild of Magic. When he heard that Lin Li was returning to Jerosis a while, he asked to know more. The conversation lasted for a good half an hour until the sound of hooves could be heard from the distance. Herza concluded the conversation by informing Lin Li that the Supreme Council would send one person in charge to Jerosis, and that person would be assisting Lin Li in building the new Guild of Magic. Perhaps it was due to Lin Li's eagerness to return home, but the trial ended haphazardly. After bidding goodbye to everyone there, Kevin's coach had entered the Aurora Square. Goodbye, everyone. Sean's strong build was like a magical beast, taking up more than half of the space in the coach. When he saw Lin Li come in, the good-natured man who had been gone for around a month suddenly became very nervous. Felix. Mr. Felix. Good evening, Sean, Lin Li greeted Sean cheerfully. How could he not know the reason behind Sean's anxiety? That fella had to be afraid of him asking about his whereabouts during the past month. Don't worry, I know that you promised someone and can't tell me anything. Rest assured, if you are not willing to say, I won't force you, Lin Li said with a warm smile. Thank you, Mr. Felix. Oh, yes. Sean, I see that you are close to level 14. Will it affect your breakthrough if you accompany me back to Jerosis? And nope. That's great. After speaking to Sean, Lin Li stuck his head out of the coach. Kevin, did Ina not come with you? Yeah, Kevin replied as he nodded his head, and told Lin Li what happened. The matter was rather coincidental. When Kevin rented the coach in the afternoon, he went to Alana Guild of Magic to look for Sean, who had just returned. Then, the two men followed Lin Li's request and traveled to the campsite of the Silver Hand. Yet, they could not see anyone at the campsite. It wasn't until they found an adventurer that they knew that the Silver Hand had just taken on a huge mission. Everybody had left, except for no more than 10 low-level members, who stayed behind to guard the campsite. I see, Lin Li replied, and did not ask further. In reality, he actually felt that it was safe to leave Ina with the silver hand. Serena was a clever and sympathetic woman. Although it was not extremely safe to follow her, Ina wouldn't be at disadvantage. The three men took turns to drive the coach. They passed by the familiar Black Hills town when it was nearly midnight. This time, Lin Li did not dare to stay over at the Black Hills town. He had no choice. Once bitten, twice shy, every time he stayed at the Black Hills town, there would be lives lost. Now that the Emerald Tower had a fire and nobody knew Jirian's whereabouts, how would Lin Li dare to waste his time here? The three men traveled through the night without stopping. Finally, they crossed the borders of Jirosis before the sunset. Everything around them became very familiar. Lin Li looked out from the coach and saw the tip of the Emerald Tower, clearly. Jirosis, I'm back. After reaching his dear Jirosis, the breath of the familiar air made Lin Li very anxious. Let's return to the Emerald Tower first. Alright, Mr. Felix. Sean shook the ropes in his hands, and they passed through the streets of Jirosis. Everything in Jirosis stayed the same. The Gilded Rose still had great business, and the Adventurers Guild was still bustling with activity. The only thing that was different was that it was a little too lively in the Emerald Tower today. Before the coach took a turn at the corner of the streets, Lin Li could hear an argument going on from afar. He immediately realized that the argument came from the Emerald Tower. Lin could not help but feel suspicious. He urged Sean to go faster. The hooves sounded as they passed through the streets. Not long after, they reached the base of the Emerald Tower. What the hell is happening? Lin Li grumbled as he saw the scene before him. There was a group of 30 men blocking the main entrance of the Emerald Tower. All of them were carrying weapons and had a fierce expression on their face. A fool would have known that they were not to be messed with. Something that made Lin Li very doubtful was the abilities of the troops standing there. Although all of them looked very threatening, there was only one powerful man among them. He was a level 10 warrior. He had a long, deep scar on his face that resembled a disgusting earthworm. He was wearing the common rough leather armor of an adventurer, and holding on to a delicate machete. He blocked the entrance of the Emerald Tower like a lone shark visiting his debtor. What on earth is he trying to do? Lin Li asked. He was surprised. Since the fall of the Merlin family, the power of the Emerald Tower became unrivaled. Even the wealthy Manus family and the mysterious Saruman family would not have dared to create trouble for the Emerald Tower. There was a saying, a lean camel that dies of starvation is still bigger than a horse. In other words, the intrinsically superior were bound to outdo the inferior. Lin Li could not understand why a fire would cause the Emerald Tower to be the subject of gossips when it was still an impregnable force in Jirosis. Since these men were not stronger than level 10, why were they here, before the Emerald Tower? Fook, do you think the Guild of Magic now is still the Guild of Magic of the past? You morons, wake up now. Jirosis has nothing to do with the Guild of Magic now. Even that old coward Jirian had escaped after the fire. What do you have to stop us? Brothers, let's be like the Shadow's Nest, burn this useless Emerald Tower down again. Yes. Burn their den, and see if they will dare to be so cocky. Hell yeah, I've always been tired of these morons. Let's do it. Who knows if that old turtle, Jirian, is hidden inside? Let's go and hand him over to the Shadow's Nest. Scarface immediately got the raging support from his men. The over 30 men raised their weapons and ran towards the entrance of the Emerald Tower. There were only a few level 5 or level 6 young mages guarding the entrance of the Emerald Tower. How would they be able to deal with these bestial warriors? Although they had exerted all their strength, they were still pushed aside by the men. Seeing that they were about to enter the Emerald Tower, the young mages were so anxious that they sweated profusely. Just when Scarface pushed the young mage away and wanted to bring his men in, he saw a long red shadow flash past him. Before he knew it, he saw a floor of blood-red vines crawling towards them from all directions. In the blink of an eye, they entangled a few of his men. Then, a hair-raising sound could be heard. The red vines wiggled and became like leeches, sucking onto his men. Oh my God, the men who were still intimidating backed off subconsciously. Then, Scarface suddenly realized that there was a coach that suddenly appeared at the entrance of the Emerald Tower. A smiling young man aged around 20 walked out of it. But, the words that came out of his mouth caused everyone to break out in cold sweat. People who want to invade the Emerald Tower, die. The silence at the entrance of the Emerald Tower was deafening. There was only the sucking sound that came from the bloodvines. Scarface swallowed his saliva in trepidation. In fact, he really wished to escape from this horrific place immediately. The gaze of that young man was very scary. He felt as though he was targeted by a magical beast. A poisonous snake would have been more friendly towards him. But, Scarface knew that he should not escape. Since the men under him were all mercenaries, they were not loyal to him at all. If he were to escape, they would run off really quickly to create trouble. Who am I? Lin Li asked. Although his smile stayed the same, his ether staff flashed. Those fellas who were still trying to sneak into the Emerald Tower got caught up tightly by the bloodvines. At that instant, an ominous sound could be heard. Together with the shrieks from the men, it caused everybody to tremble in fear. Their struggle, however, were in vain. The more they fidgeted, the tighter the vines got. After a while, the once burly and strong men turned into dried corpses. When they were brought down by the bloodvines, they were rather flat. Their eyes were bulging, they died with a horrified expression. Pardon me, I'm a member of the Jurosis Guild of Magic. May I know if I have the right to discuss some things with you? After asking politely, Lin Li smiled warmly at them. You. Please stand back. Scarface screamed in terror. Lin Li's smile was so artificial that it was as though Scarface had seen a ghost. Scarface backed away cautiously. Unlike his usual oppressive stance, he was really timid now. Don't be so worried. Take it easy. I don't like to kill people or create trouble, Lin Li assured Scarface casually. After he walked along the steps up to the entrance of the Emerald Tower, he turned back to look at Scarface under his chin. The elevation gave him a sense of superiority when he looked at him. But, if there are any people who are going to enter the Emerald Tower without permission, don't blame me for not letting them go. Little fella, don't be too cocky. After witnessing the death of his men, Scarface was so spooked that he would definitely not trespass the Emerald Tower if he had 100 guts. Courage was needed to confront a monster that killed without thinking. Scarface was not bold enough to do that. Hence, he tried to put on a brave front. Let me tell you now. We blood brothers are not pushovers. How would Scarface expect that his words would lead him into greater trouble? Blood brothers? Lin Li frowned upon hearing the name. Stop there, he commanded. Although Lin Li's was not loud, his voice was like thunder to Scarface's ears. His legs turned jelly on the spot. He really wished to give himself 2 slaps on the face. Why did I say that? I would have escaped from the bloodthirsty monster if I tried. Will he swallow or skin me alive? What do you want? You are from the Blood Brothers? Yes. Very good, Lin Li said and nodded. A flash from the ether staff made the bloodvines retract, only leaving a few dried corpses on the ground. Tell Matzi to see me at the Emerald Tower at once. Scarface was speechless. He took a cold breath. Matzi was the leader of the Blood Brothers, and had great influence in Jurosis. Was that young mage mad? If he requested for Matzi to see him, why didn't he ask Isra to make Ruben meet him? Even if Jurosis Guild of Magic used to rule Jurosis in the past, it was the past. How would Matzi give face to a fallen Guild of Magic? Furthermore, if they wanted to give face, the other party would be Jirian. How could they give any respect to a 20-years-old mage? Of course. Those thoughts could only be left in Scarface's mind. He would not have the guts to say it out loud. Oh, Scarface nodded, and brought his man away quickly. Mage Felik is back, a 50-years-old magic shooter shouted when he saw the three men step into the guild hall. This announcement created a din in the whole Emerald Tower. To the Emerald Tower, the name Felik had become a legend. Everyone would know that this was the man who had created a huge commotion during the auction at Gerosis, as well as in the battle at the Daylight Square. The most ignorant fella would have heard of the young talent from the Emerald Tower whose name was Felik. This Felik stood up for Emerald Tower when it was at its weakest, and he was able to defeat the Merlin family by himself and help the Emerald Tower take control of all the forces in Gerosis. Only the people who had interacted with Lin Li and knew his true ability would know the significance of Lin Li to the Emerald Tower. It was this understanding that motivated them to guard their last piece of territory in Gerosis. They firmly believed that they would be able to overcome all adversity. They only had to endure until Felik returned to Gerosis. Then, the Merlin family and the Shadow's Nest would fall beneath Emerald Tower again. Mage Felik is back. The news of Lin Li's arrival spread around really quickly. It did not take more than 10 minutes for it to be known to the entire Emerald Tower. Yeah, I'm back. At the same time, Scarface stood before Aranmatsi fearfully. In reality, Scarface was just an external member of the Blood Brothers. In terms of status, he had no right to meet Aranmatsi at all. This time, he brought the brothers to Emerald Tower due to monetary rewards. He did not expect that Aranmatsi had such a huge network to know what had happened. It was not long after the racket at Emerald Tower that he got called to meet Aranmatsi. Then, Ross, I heard that you went to the Emerald Tower? Aranmatsi asked coldly while sizing up the trembling Scarface. Why yes. Pat. A crisp sound could be heard. Aranmatsi landed a tight slap on his face. Big boss. Fook, don't call me boss. I'm not qualified to be your boss. Aranmatsi was so angry that his lungs nearly burst. He really regretted not getting of this moron earlier. What the heck, how could these fools listen to whomever gave them money? Did they think that the Emerald Tower would fall just because of fire? Son of a biatch. Other people might not know the power of the Emerald Tower. But, how would Aranmatsi not know? Although Emerald Tower might appear to be weak now, their foundation was still extremely strong. Not to forget, the news of Jirian's death was not yet announced. That sly fatty had to be plotting some conspiracy. When he appeared again, it would be the day the Shadow's Nest repaid their debts. On top of that, Aranmatsi saw very clearly that although the Emerald Tower had been down for this period of time, their two loyal allies, Man's family and Saruman family, were still very supportive of it. Why was that so? Even the knees of Aranmatsi would know that it would be due to their young mage at Alana. Fook you, scumbags. Why are you always creating trouble for me? The thought of that young mage caused Aranmatsi to experience a huge headache. If he were to know the matter, 100 lives would not be enough for him to die. Thank you for watching Mystic Realms Recap. Please like, share and subscribe. Have a great day.